September 11, 2001 dawned with a brilliantly clear sky over New York City. The crisp air and cloudless blue expanse promised nothing but possibility as millions began their Tuesday routines. Michael Ramirez, a 43-year-old fire captain with FDNY Ladder 6 in Chinatown, kissed his sleeping wife goodbye at 5:30 a.m. 20 years on the job had taught him to appreciate these quiet moments. Their daughter's college acceptance letter was proudly displayed on the refrigerator, and they'd planned a celebration dinner that evening. Across the harbour in Jersey City, Sarah Chen reviewed her presentation notes before heading to the financial district. At 36, she was finally making her mark as an investment analyst at Morgan Stanley, with an office on the 61st floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. In Brooklyn, Omar Nawaz helped his 6-year-old son pack his backpack for school. Since emigrating from Pakistan 5 years earlier, Omar had built a successful career as an 8 specialist for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 103rd floor of the North Tower. He and his wife had recently closed on their first home, a modest but proud achievement in their American journey. "Be good at school today," Omar told his son. "When I come home, we'll finish that model airplane." At Logan International Airport in Boston, flight attendant Lissa Jefferson prepared for her shift aboard American Airlines Flight 11. In a hotel room near the airport, Mohammed Atta performed his morning prayers before preparing for his journey to the airport, his mind focused on the mission that had consumed months of planning. These lives, and thousands more, were converging toward a morning that would forever alter them all. By 8:30 am, the World Trade Center was coming to life. Omar settled at his desk with coffee, sending a quick email about an afternoon meeting. Sarah arranged handouts in her conference room, feeling confident in her preparation. Across the plaza, thousands of others went about their morning routines, unaware that the clear blue sky would soon become the backdrop for horror. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower between floors 93 and 99. The building shuddered violently as a massive fireball erupted from the impact zone. Omar Nawaz felt his entire world lurch sideways as his office filled with smoke and flames. In an instant, ordinary life transformed into a desperate fight for survival. 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower between floors 77 and 85. Sarah Chen was leading her presentation when the room around her exploded. The force threw her against a wall, papers swirling in the sudden rush of smoke and debris. On the ground, Fire Captain Michael Ramirez had responded immediately to the first impact. When the second plane hit, any doubt about what was happening vanished. "This is a deliberate attack," he told his crew as they prepared to enter the North Tower. "Stay together. Our job is to get as many people out as possible." Within 18 minutes, America had changed forever. The impact zone in the North Tower had instantly transformed the 103rd floor into an inferno. Omar found himself trapped as the blast killed many of his colleagues instantly. Those who survived faced a horrifying reality. The floors above them were consumed by fire, and all stairwells appeared to be cut off. Omar crawled toward a window, desperate for air as smoke filled his lungs. With trembling hands, he managed to dial his wife's number. "There's been an explosion," he said when she answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't know if I can get out. Tell Samir I love him. Tell him I'm proud of him." "Omar, what's happening? What explosion?" His wife's voice cracked with fear. "Just remember I love you both. You're the best thing in my life." As smoke thickened around him, Omar knew he was saying goodbye. In the South Tower, Sarah had survived the initial impact, though she was injured and disoriented. The plane had struck below her floor, but the building's infrastructure was compromised. Through the chaos, an announcement came over the emergency system advising people to stay in place, standard protocol for high-rise fires. But Sarah, seeing the smoke rising past her windows and remembering what had just happened to the North Tower, made a crucial decision. "We need to evacuate now," she told her clients and colleagues. "Forget the announcement. We're getting out." Leading a group of 12 people, Sarah navigated through darkened hallways to find stairwell, which would later be identified as the only viable escape route from the upper floors of the South Tower. Her decisive action would prove life-saving. Captain Michael Ramirez led his company into the North Tower, joining hundreds of firefighters converging on the site. "Stay low, check every floor, mark as you clear," he instructed his men as they began their ascent. The weight of their gear made each step laborious, but they pushed upward against the tide of evacuating civilians. As they climbed, Michael encountered a woman frozen in fear on the 12th floor, unable to continue down. "What's your name?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Emma," she whispered, shaking uncontrollably. "Emma, I'm Captain Ramirez. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to stand up now." His calm authority broke through her panic, and she allowed him to help her to her feet. "One of my men will escort you down. Just keep moving." At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, killing 64 people on the plane and 125 inside the building. As this news reached the first responders in New York, there was no time to process the widening horror. Their focus remained singular: save as many lives as possible. At 9:59 a.m., after burning for 56 minutes, the South Tower collapsed. Sarah Chen and 7 members of her group had made it to the lobby just 3 minutes before collapse. They were directed to exit toward Church Street, a decision that placed them just far enough from the building to survive. Covered in dust, coughing and disoriented, Sarah helped a severely injured colleague move away from the growing dust cloud. In the North Tower, Captain Ramirez and his company had reached the 27th floor when they felt the ground shake violently beneath them. Their radios crackled with incomprehensible shouts before someone's voice cut through clearly. "The South Tower is down. The South Tower has collapsed." The firefighters exchanged stunned glances, the implications instantly clear. If one tower could fall, so could the other. "Continue evacuation, but expedite," Michael ordered, pushing down his own fear. "We've got people above us who need help." Meanwhile, on United Airlines Flight 93, passengers who had learned about the other attacks through phone calls formulated a plan to retake the aircraft from the hijackers. "Let's roll," Todd Beamer was heard saying before they launched their counterattack. At 10:03 a.m., Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing all 44 aboard, but failing to reach the hijackers' intended target, believed to be the U.S. Capitol or the White House. At 10:28 a.m., after burning for 102 minutes, the North Tower collapsed. Captain Michael Ramirez and his company were still inside, joining 342 other firefighters, 60 police officers, and 8 paramedics who gave their lives while trying to save others. Omar Nawaz and all those trapped on the upper floors perished as well, the final phone calls to their loved ones becoming their lasting legacy. In the space of 102 minutes, nearly 3,000 lives had been extinguished, and the world had witnessed an attack of unprecedented scope on American soil. By noon, Manhattan had transformed into an island of exodus. With all transportation suspended, hundreds of thousands of people walked northward away from the disaster zone. Strangers shared water, offered shoes to those whose feet were bleeding, and held up cell phones for others to use. Along the Hudson River, an extraordinary maritime evacuation unfolded. Tugboats, ferries, private boats, and sightseeing vessels converged on Manhattan to transport stranded people to safety, the largest water evacuation in history, moving more people than were rescued from Dunkirk during World War II. Sarah Chen found herself aboard a small ferry pressed into emergency service. Still in shock, her business suit covered in grey dust, she sat silently among other survivors as they crossed to Jersey City. The Manhattan skyline behind them was transformed, the absence of the towers creating a void that seemed impossible to comprehend. At Ground Zero, search and rescue teams worked alongside construction workers operating heavy machinery to carefully peel away layers of debris, desperately listening for signs of life within the rubble. As sunset approached, President George W. Bush addressed the nation from the Oval Office. "Today, our nation saw evil," he said. "The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." For families of the missing, the night brought unimaginable anguish. Maria Ramirez, wife of Captain Michael, waited at their designated meeting point for hours, refusing to leave even as hope diminished. When a fellow firefighter finally came to tell her that Michael's entire company was unaccounted for, she collapsed into his arms. "He can't be gone," she whispered. "We were going to celebrate Nicole's college acceptance tonight." In Jersey City, Omar's wife Fatima faced the same devastating reality. With her young son finally asleep, after hours of asking when his father would come home, she sat alone with a photo album, tracing the outline of Omar's face with her finger. Their American dream, built over years of hard work and sacrifice, had been shattered in an instant. By the following morning, the full scope of the attacks was becoming clear. The official death toll would eventually reach 2,977 innocent victims, representing 90 countries and all walks of life. The diverse makeup of the victims reflected New York itself, and America as a whole, with executives and janitors, firefighters and food service workers among the lost. As Wednesday dawned, makeshift memorials began appearing throughout the city. Photos of the missing were taped to walls, fences, and lampposts, often accompanied by handwritten notes pleading for information. "Have you seen my son? My wife works on the 89th floor. Please call if you've seen him." These walls of the missing would become powerful symbols of the human cost of the attacks. Sarah Chen, returning to her apartment for the first time since the attacks, found herself unable to wash away the dust that clung to her hair and skin. "It feels wrong to wash it off," she told her sister on the phone. "These are the remains of my coworkers, my building, everything." This sentiment was shared by many survivors who recognized that the dust coating Manhattan contained not just pulverized building materials, but human remains as well. At Ground Zero, the rescue operation continued around the clock, though hope for finding survivors diminished with each passing hour. The site was hazardous. Unstable debris, fires burning at temperatures up to 1,500 degrees, exposed electrical wires, and toxic air filled with pulverized glass, asbestos, and countless other contaminants. Despite these conditions, thousands of workers continued the grim task of searching through the rubble. Construction workers who had helped build the towers now worked to dismantle their remains. Firefighters, many who had lost close friends and colleagues, searched tirelessly for their fallen brothers. By Thursday, September 13th, The reality that the operation had shifted from rescue to recovery began to sink in. No survivors had been found since the day before. For families awaiting news, this transition was devastating. Maria Ramirez joined hundreds of other families at the Javits Center, which had been converted into a family assistance center. There, she provided details about Michael, his identifying features, what he might have been wearing, dental records that could help identify remains. He has a scar on his right shoulder from a burn injury 3 years ago, she told the medical examiner's representative, her voice steady even as tears streamed down her face. And he always wears his wedding ring. It has our initials inside. In Washington, President Bush visited Ground Zero on September 14th, climbing atop a destroyed fire truck with his arm around a firefighter. When someone in the crowd shouted that they couldn't hear him, Bush responded with words that would define the national mood. "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." The crowd erupted in chants of USA, USA. A moment of unity and defiance amid the devastation. For Sarah Chen, who watched the visit on a small TV in her sister's apartment, the moment brought the first tears she had been able to shed since the attacks. "I think I've been in shock," she told her sister. "But seeing that sight on TV, knowing I was there when it was still two towers, it finally feels real." As September gave way to October, the recovery operation at Ground Zero continued without pause. A round-the-clock effort that would eventually remove 1.8 million tons of debris from the site. The search for human remains would continue for months, though many families would never receive confirmation of their loved one's fate. Of the 2,753 victims killed at the World Trade Center, only 1,644 would be positively identified over the years that followed. In the weeks and months following the attacks, America underwent profound changes. Enhanced security measures transformed everyday experiences, from air travel to entering office buildings. Military forces deployed to Afghanistan to target al-Qaeda and the Taliban regime that had harbored them. Intelligence agencies reorganized to address the failures that had allowed the attacks to occur undetected. Maria Ramirez received official confirmation of Michael's death in late October, when his remains were identified through DNA testing. The funeral drew hundreds of firefighters in formal dress uniforms, their collective presence a testament to the brotherhood that defined the FDNY. Michael's helmet, recovered from the rubble, sat atop his flag-draped casket. "He died as he lived," the eulogy noted, moving toward danger while others moved away from it. For Maria and her daughter Nicole, grief was complicated by pride in Michael's sacrifice and anger at the circumstances of his death. Nicole deferred her college acceptance for a year, unable to imagine beginning that chapter of her life amid such loss. Fatima Nawaz faced not only the loss of her husband Omar, but also a rising tide of anti-Muslim sentiment that made her feel suddenly foreign in the country she called home. When their son's school called because another child had pushed Samir and called him a terrorist, Fatima realized their grief would be compounded by the burden of suspicion. "My husband was a victim, not a perpetrator," she explained patiently to the school principal. "He was murdered by the same people America is now fighting." Despite these challenges, Fatima found unexpected support. Their neighbors organized a meal train that ensured food appeared at their doorstep for weeks. Omar's colleagues at Cantor Fitzgerald, which lost 658 employees in the attacks, more than any other company, established an assistance fund for families that provided financial support and college scholarships for children of those lost. Sarah Chen struggled with survivor's guilt that manifested in insomnia and panic attacks. the question of why she had survived, while so many others had not haunted her daily. Her decision to evacuate against official instructions had saved not only her life, but those of 7 colleagues who followed her down Stairwell A. "Why did I decide to leave when others stayed?" she asked during a therapy session 3 months after the attacks. "What made me different?" Her therapist, Dr. Eleanor Wright, specialized in trauma recovery. "The mind makes meaning from randomness," she explained. But sometimes survival comes down to timing, location, and instinct. You made a good decision in a crisis situation. That doesn't make you more deserving of life than those who didn't have the same opportunity. At Ground Zero, the recovery operation continued into the spring of 2002. The last support beam was ceremonially removed on May 30, 2002, marking the official end of the recovery effort. The beam, covered in memorial messages and mementos from first responders, was draped with an American flag and carried out with honor guard accompaniment. As the first anniversary approached, debate emerged about how best to commemorate the attacks. The solution came in the form of a reading of names. All 2,977 victims would be acknowledged individually, their names spoken aloud in a ceremony at Ground Zero. The reading would be punctuated by moments of silence, marking the timing of each plane crash and building collapse. On September 11, 2002, Maria Ramirez stood among thousands of family members at the ceremony in Lower Manhattan. When Michael's name was read, she closed her eyes and pictured not his death, but his life, coaching Nichols' softball team, laughing during family barbecues, the pride in his eyes on their 20th anniversary. Fatima Nawaz chose not to attend the public ceremony, instead taking Samir to Omar's favourite spot in Prospect Park. There, they released white balloons into the clear September sky, the same brilliant blue as the day that had changed their lives forever. "Your father loved you very much," Fatima told her son as they watched the balloons drift upward. "And he would want us to be brave and build a good life here." Sarah Chen attended the ceremony as part of a group of survivors, wearing a badge with the names of the 5 colleagues from her floor who hadn't made it out. When the moment of silence marking the South Tower collapse arrived, she found herself holding hands with strangers on either side, their shared experience creating an immediate bond that required no explanation. In the years that followed, the physical and emotional landscape of post-9/11 events, America would continue to evolve. The site of the World Trade Center would eventually feature a powerful memorial, 2 square pools with cascading waterfalls in the footprints of the original towers, surrounded by bronze panels inscribed with victims' names. Adjacent to this, a new tower would rise. One World Trade Center, 1,776 feet tall. Its height a deliberate reference to the year of American independence. The health impacts on survivors and first responders would emerge more slowly but with devastating consequences. Thousands of those who had worked on the pile or lived and worked nearby developed respiratory conditions, cancers, and other illnesses linked to the toxic dust they had inhaled. The battle for recognition and compensation for these victims would continue for years, with legislation finally passed in 2019 to ensure lifetime coverage for 9/11's related health conditions. For those who lost loved ones, the path forward involved finding ways to honor memory while still embracing life. Maria Ramirez eventually established a scholarship fund in Michael's name for children of first responders pursuing careers in public service. Fatima Nawaz completed her teaching certification and began working at Samir's school, helping a new generation understand the importance of tolerance and cross-cultural understanding. Sarah Chen left her financial career to work with an architectural firm, specializing in safety innovations for high-rise buildings. Her experiences informed designs that would help save lives in future emergencies, creating a legacy that transformed tragedy into prevention. By 2011, as the 10-year anniversary approached, some measure of justice had been achieved with the killing of Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the attacks. The news brought complicated emotions for many 9/11's families, not celebration, but a sense of grim closure and reassurance that the perpetrator had finally been held accountable. The 10th anniversary ceremonies were marked by the opening of the National September 11 Memorial, with the reflecting pools exactly in the footprints of the Twin Towers. The names of all victims were inscribed in bronze around the pools, arranged not alphabetically but by meaningful adjacencies, keeping together those who had worked together, died together, or shared family connections. For Samir Nawaz, now 16, the ceremony marked his first visit to the memorial. Despite growing up in the shadow of his father's death, the physical reality of seeing Omar's name etched in bronze made the loss newly tangible. "I know all the facts," he told Fatima later. "I know how he died, but I don't really know who he was." "Then I'll tell you," she promised, understanding that adolescence had brought new questions about identity and heritage. That evening, they looked through old photo albums and videos, Fatima sharing stories of Omar's humor, his determination, his pride in becoming an American while honoring his Pakistani roots. Sarah Chen's healing journey had taken her in unexpected directions. After years of therapy addressing her PTSD and survivor's guilt, she had become a certified trauma counselor herself, specializing in helping survivors of mass casualty events. At a professional conference in 2011, she gave a keynote address titled "From Surviving to Serving: Turning Trauma into Purpose." Recovery isn't about forgetting, she told the audience of mental health professionals. It's about integrating the experience into your life narrative in a way that allows forward movement without denial. For many of us, that means finding ways to use our painful experiences to help others. The global impact of 9/11 continued to unfold as well. American troops remained in Afghanistan, fighting what had become the longest war in U.S. history. The Department of Homeland Security, created in direct response to the attacks, had dramatically expanded government capabilities for detecting and preventing terrorism, though often with significant implications for privacy and civil liberties. Airport security had been permanently transformed, with the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, fundamentally changing the experience of air travel. Passengers had grown accustomed to removing shoes, limiting liquids, and passing through increasingly sophisticated screening technology, all changes stemming directly from the security failures that had enabled the 9/11's hijackings. By the time the 15th anniversary arrived in 2016, a new generation was coming of age, children born after the attacks who had never known a world where 9/11's hadn't happened. For them, heightened security, the war on terror, and the changed Manhattan skyline weren't changes, but simply the world as it had always been. This reality became apparent to Maria when her granddaughter, 6-year-old Sophia, asked an innocent question during a memorial visit. Why did the bad men knock down the buildings? The question stopped Maria cold. How could she explain such horror to a child? How could she convey the enormity of what had happened without transferring her own trauma to the next generation? Some people were very angry and did a terrible thing, she finally answered. But what's more important is how people helped each other afterward. That's why we come here, to remember the heroes like your grandfather who saved many lives that day. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was an age-appropriate beginning to a conversation that would evolve as Sophia grew older. Maria realized that part of her responsibility was helping shape how future generations would understand 9/11 events, not just as a day of tragedy, but as a testament to human resilience and compassion. For the 20th anniversary in 2021, the commemorations took place in the shadow of another national crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. The parallels weren't lost on Sarah Chen, who found herself once again helping people process collective trauma, this time on a global scale. The 20th anniversary coincided with the final withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, bringing a complicated conclusion to America's longest war. The timing prompted reflection on the full arc of America's response to 9/11 events and the complex legacy of decisions made in its aftermath. As evening fell on this 20th anniversary, the tribute in light, two powerful blue beams reaching skyward from near Ground Zero, echoing the shapes of the fallen towers, illuminated the Manhattan skyline. First introduced 6 months after the attacks, the tribute had become an annual tradition, visible for miles around the city and from aircraft passing overhead. Sarah Chen watched the lights from Brooklyn Bridge Park, surrounded by a group of fellow survivors who gathered annually for this private commemoration. They had formed a tight-knit community over the years, understanding each other's ongoing struggles in ways that even well-meaning friends and family sometimes couldn't. "It never really ends," one of the group members observed as they gazed at the beams piercing the darkness. "The grief changes shape, becomes less acute, but it's always there, like those lights, visible from a distance, impossible to ignore." Sarah nodded in agreement. "But we keep moving forward," she added. "We build new lives around the emptiness. We find purpose in what happened to us. That's its own kind of triumph." At St. Paul's Chapel, the small historic church that had miraculously survived the collapse of the Twin Towers, despite being just across the street, a candlelight vigil brought together families, survivors, and first responders. The chapel had served as a relief center for recovery workers in the months after the attacks, its fence becoming an impromptu memorial. Now, 20 years later, Maria Ramirez, Fatima Nawaz, and Sarah Chen found themselves in the same space, though they had never met. Different paths had brought them to this moment of shared commemoration. One had lost a husband who rushed toward danger to save others. One had lost a husband who went to work on an ordinary Tuesday and never came home, and one had survived when so many around her did not. Their stories represented thousands of others, the first responders who gave their lives, the civilians who perished, and those who carried the burden of survival. Together, they embodied both the tragedy of September 11th and the resilience that followed, individual threads in the larger American story of a day that had changed everything. On a crisp September morning in 2023, a high school class from Milwaukee, students born years after the attacks, visited the National September 11 Memorial and Museum. Their teacher, Emma Rodriguez, had organized the trip as part of a curriculum on watershed moments in modern American history. Pay attention to how the museum presents both factual information and personal stories, she instructed as they passed through security. Notice what emotions the space is designed to evoke, and think about why these design choices matter in how we understand historical events. As they gathered around a display of personal items belonging to victims, one student, Maya Johnson, raised her hand. "Ms. Rodriguez, my grandmother says she remembers exactly where she was when she heard about the attacks. Everyone from her generation does. Is that normal for historical events?" "That's an excellent observation," Emma replied. "Psychologists call it a flashbulb memory, an unusually vivid and detailed recollection that forms during highly emotional or significant events. 9/11 created these memories for an entire generation, just as the Kennedy assassination did for your grandparents' generation. Another student, Zain Ahmed, had been quietly examining the Wall of Faces, the collection of photos of all 2,977 victims. There are Muslims here, he noted, pointing to several names. But after this happened, Muslims were blamed. My dad says our mosque had windows broken a few weeks after 9/11, even though they'd held a prayer service for the victims. His observation prompted a thoughtful discussion about the mixed experiences of Muslim Americans after the attacks. How many had suffered discrimination while simultaneously grieving as Americans for their attacked nation? The conversation reflected how 9/11's education had evolved to include multiple perspectives and a complex aftermath, not just the events of the day itself. Near the museum's exit, the class encountered Sarah Chen, now in her late 50s, who volunteered as a docent every Wednesday. After sharing her personal story of escape from the South Tower, she asked if the students had questions. "Were you scared to go back into tall buildings after that?" one student asked. Sarah nodded. "For years, I had panic attacks in elevators. I still avoid working above the 30th floor of any building. But fear wasn't the only response. I also felt a responsibility to use what I'd learned to help make buildings safer." "Do you think something like this could happen again?" another student questioned. Sarah considered the question carefully. The specific vulnerability that allowed 9/11 to happen has been addressed. We have reinforced cockpit doors, better intelligence sharing, more awareness. But history rarely repeats exactly. The challenge is preparing for new threats while not allowing fear to control how we live. As the students filed out, Sarah noticed Maya lingering behind, studying a quote etched on the wall from Roman philosopher Virgil. "No day shall erase you from the memory of time." "What does that mean to you?" Sarah asked gently. Maya looked thoughtful. "I guess it means that even though I wasn't alive when this happened, it's still part of my history too. And remembering matters, even when it's hard." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly right. That's why I'm here every Wednesday, telling my story to people who weren't born yet when it happened. Memory connects generations." Elsewhere in New York that same day, Nicole Ramirez Kennedy, daughter of Captain Michael Ramirez, was conducting a training session for new trauma counselors. At 40, she had built a respected career helping first responders and their families manage the psychological impacts of their work. "My father died on 9/11, she began, establishing her personal connection to the material. "But his death isn't the only reason I do this work. I do it because I've seen how addressing trauma properly can transform suffering into something meaningful." At John F. Kennedy International Airport, Samir Nawaz, now 28, cleared security for his flight to San Francisco. His technology company had recently launched an artificial intelligence system designed to improve emergency response coordination during disasters. Work directly inspired by his father's death and the communication failures that had hampered rescue efforts on 9/11. "My father was a NATE specialist," he often told people when explaining his career choice. "I like to think I'm continuing his work, just adapted for today's challenges." These four individuals, the high school student born after the attacks, the daughter of a fallen firefighter, the survivor turned educator, and the son of a Muslim victim building technology for future emergencies, represented the diverse ways in which 9/11 continued to influence American life more than 2 decades later. For Maya's generation, 9/11 was history to be learned rather than experience to be remembered. For Nicole, it was both personal tragedy and professional calling, grief transformed into purpose through helping others. For Sarah, it was the trauma that had redefined her life's work. For Samir, it was the complex legacy of personal loss entwined with questions of national identity and belonging. Together, their stories illustrated how a single historic event could generate countless individual narratives, each contributing to a fuller understanding of what 9/11 meant to America as both nation and collection of individual lives. The attacks had not created a single unified story, but rather thousands of interconnected ones, of loss and recovery, challenge and response, injury and healing. As the sun set on this ordinary September day in 2023, the tribute in light beams once again illuminated the Manhattan skyline. For those who remembered 9/11 directly, the lights evoked immediate personal associations: where they were, what they felt, how they responded. For younger Americans, the lights represented something different, a connection to a defining national experience they knew only through stories, images, and memorials. Yet for all Americans, regardless of age or personal connection, the lights served as a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience, of capacity for both devastation and recovery. They illuminated not just the space where the towers had stood, but the continuing journey of a nation still processing the meanings and lessons of that September morning. The story of 9/11 thus remained unfinished, not simply because its impacts continued to unfold, but because each generation would bring new perspectives, questions, and understandings to an event that had indelibly altered American history. In that ongoing process of remembrance, reflection, and reinterpretation lay perhaps the most enduring legacy of September 11, 2001, its power to prompt continuing engagement with fundamental questions about security and freedom, unity and division, tragedy and recovery. What remained consistent across these evolving understandings was the recognition that beneath the political, military, and institutional responses lay the deeply human dimensions of the story, the lives lost, the courage displayed, the grief endured, and a determination to move forward without forgetting. In those human elements, Americans of all generations could find points of connection to both the specific events of 9/11 and the broader experience of confronting tragedy with resilience.